If you've found yourself here tonight, chances are you're not looking for a thrill. You're not here for breaking news, shocking scandals, or wild conspiracy theory. No, you're here for something much more powerful. The subtle, sleepy magic of boring history. The kind of stories that never made headlines. Because, well, they were never meant to. Stories about forgotten folks, beard taxes, and molasses floods. The slow, dusty side of history where nothing moves too fast and no one raises their voice. It is the type of history that never kept anyone up at night, and might just be the thing to help you fall asleep. So, settle in. There's no need to pay close attention. You won't be tested. You won't be quizzed. Just let your mind drift as we wander through some of the calmest, most uneventful moments humanity has ever lived through. We'll begin with the humble fork, a utensil so ordinary today, it's hard to imagine it ever caused outrage. And yet, it once did. The invention of the fork before the fork joined the table. People simply used their fingers. Ooh. Or, if they were feeling a bit fancy, a knife and maybe a spoon. For most of human history, that was perfectly acceptable. After all, why stab your food with prongs when you could just pick it up? But the fork had other plans. The earliest known forks appeared in the Middle East around the 7th century. They were small, delicate tools used mostly for serving, not eating. Over time, they made their way to the Byzantine Empire, where aristocrats started using them at banquets. This didn't go unnoticed by a Byzantine princess married into the Venetian royal family in the 11th century. She brought her forks with her, but instead of being impressed, the Italians were horrified. Religious leaders even called forks an insult to God, arguing that he had already given us perfectly good tools, our fingers. For centuries after that, forks were considered suspicious, elitist, even unholy. It wasn't until the 16th and 17th centuries that forks began to spread across Europe. Italian nobles started using them more often, and travelers from France and England began noticing. Slowly, and we do mean slowly, the fork became less controversial and more convenient. By the 18th century, it had quietly worked its way into everyday life. No revolutions, no protests. Just a little piece of metal that stabbed its way into history. One quiet meal at a time. The history of counting sheep is one of the oldest sleep tricks in the book. You close your eyes, lie back, and imagine a wooden fence. One by one, fluffy little sheep leap over it. Bevort, you count them. 1, 2, 3, hoping your mind will drift away before you reach 10. But where did this oddly specific idea come from? The origins of counting sheep go back further than you might expect. Some trace it to medieval shepherds who would mentally track their flocks at night. It was a practical habit, not a sleep aid. As the rhythm of counting soothed their thoughts, it began to take on a second purpose. By the time written stories came around, the idea had already taken root. A 12th century Spanish tale by Juan Ruiz mentioned a man who tried to fall asleep by counting sheep. Centuries before bedtime routines were even a thing in the story. It didn't help, but the idea stuck anyway. Fast forward a few hundred years, and counting sheep had become a It was whispered as advice, passed down like an old recipe, a mental lullaby with no clear author. Psychologists have since studied it. Oddly enough, it turns out counting sheep isn't especially effective. The repetition might calm you, but it's just as likely to bore the brain into wandering. More recent studies say imagining calming scenes, like walking through a peaceful meadow, works better. Still, there's something charming about it. Picture after picture of woolly animals hopping peacefully into the air, only to disappear into nothingness. Maybe it's not meant to help us sleep. Maybe it's just meant to remind us how peaceful life can be. When all we're responsible for is watching the sheep, the world's most useless war. Some wars last years by. Others drag on for decades. But one war in history barely lasted long enough to finish a cup of tea by. It happened on a warm morning in 1896 in a small corner of the world, the island of Zanzibar, off the coast of East Africa, a British protectorate at the time. Zanzibar was going through a bit of political drama. The Sultan had just died, and his cousin seized the throne without asking Britain's permission. The British, being quite fond of rules and protocol, weren't too pleased. He issued an ultimatum: step down by 9 a.m., or there would be consequences. The new Sultan refused. So, at exactly 9:02 a.m., on August 27th, British ships in the harbor opened fire. Cannons boomed. Smoke filled the air. A royal palace was damaged, and within 38 minutes, the war was over. Not an exaggeration. The entire conflict lasted less than an episode of your average TV show. One side had a few casualties. The other side had none. British appointed a new sultan, who, predictably, was much more agreeable. And just like that, it was done. No epic battles, no long marches, no heroes or villains. Just a brief burst of noise, a puff of smoke, and a new entry in the record books. The Anglo-Zanzibar War remains the shortest war in recorded history. A reminder that even when countries disagree, sometimes they just don't feel like dragging it out. The rise and fall of the beard tax. There was a time, not so long ago, when having a beard could actually cost you money. The story takes us back to 17th century Russia, where Tsar Peter the Great was in the mood for modernization. After traveling through Europe, he returned home with grand ambitions. He wanted Russia to look, think, and act more like the West. And to him, that meant one thing. Oddly enough, less facial hair. In Peter's eyes, beards were a symbol of the old world. Slow, traditional, resistant to change. Clean-shaven faces, on the other hand, represented progress. So, in 1698, he introduced what can only be described as one of history's most peculiar laws. The beard tax. Men who wanted to keep their beards had to pay for the privilege. Those who paid were given a small metal token to carry in their pockets. It featured a picture of a beard and the words, "The beard tax has been taken pre." Without that token, you risked having your beard publicly shaved off, sometimes right in the street. To be fair, many Russians were not impressed. The beard had deep cultural and religious significance, especially among the Orthodox faithful. But Peter wasn't interested in tradition. P saw beards as backward, and backward didn't fit with his plan. The tax remained in place for years. Some paid it, some protested, some shaved reluctantly, and eventually it faded away. Not with a dramatic moment or a big public outcry, just a quiet ending to a choir rule that made history feel a little more bizarre. Imagine living in a world where your beard required paperwork. Then again, maybe that's the kind of slow-moving society that's perfect for sleep. When the calendar changed and people lost 11 days. Imagine going to bed on September 2nd and waking up on September 14th. Not because you overslept, but because the calendar skipped ahead. It sounds like a dream, or maybe a glitch in time. But in 1752, that's exactly what happened in Britain and its colonies. To understand why, we need to rewind a bit, all the way back to Julius Caesar. His calendar, the Julian calendar, had served Europe for over 1,600 years. It had a small problem. It miscalculated the length of the year by just 11 minutes. Now, 11 minutes may not seem like much, but over centuries, it added up. Seasons drifted. Spring arrived too early. Religious holidays fell out of sync. Eventually, something had to be done. So, in 1582, Pope Gregory XIII introduced a new system, the Gregorian calendar. It fixed the math, aligned with the seasons, and included leap years in a more precise way. Catholic countries adopted it right away. Britain, however, being rather Protestant at the time, was in no rush to follow the Pope's lead. For over 150 years, they stuck with the old system. Until finally, in 1752, they gave in and made the switch. But to catch up with the rest of Europe, they had to delete 11 days. And just like that, the calendar jumped. September 2nd was followed immediately by September 14, 11 ordinary days, simply gone. Some people were confused. Some were angry. Folklore claims that crowds demanded their days back, shouting, "Give us our 11 days." Poof. Though modern historians say that protest was likely exaggerated, it makes for a nice bedtime myth. In any case, time moved on. Seasons returned to their proper places, and the lost days became a strange little wrinkle in history. A reminder that even time can be edited. The Great Molasses Flood on a quiet January afternoon in 1919. The streets of Boston's North End were unusually warm for winter. The city hummed with the gentle noise of life. The clatter of horses, the chatter of dogs, and the slow groan of a giant molasses tank. Yes, molasses. Thick, sweet, and unsuspecting. This tank stood 50 feet tall and held more than 2 million gallons of it, used to make alcohol during the height of the rum industry. But on that day, something gave way. Perhaps it was the heat, or the pressure, or simply time. Whatever the reason, the tank burst, and the molasses came rushing out. Bitter, a slow-moving wave, 25 feet high, and as thick as syrup rolled through the streets. It moved at around 35 miles per hour, faster than you'd expect for something poured on pancakes, but slow enough to feel like a nightmare happening in slow motion. Buildings were crushed, horses were swept away, streets were flooded in brown, sticky chaos. In the end, 21 people lost their lives, and over 100 were injured. Cleanup took weeks. The scent of molasses, they said, lingered for months. Some claimed they could still smell it years later, especially on hot days. It became known as the Great Molasses Flood, one of history's strangest disasters. No fire, no explosion, just a creeping wall of sugar that quietly changed everything. There was no warning, no enemy, just gravity and molasses. A reminder that even the slowest things in life can surprise us. The emperor who napped through history, some rulers leave behind legacies of conquests and reform. Others just want dumplings and a quiet place to nap. Meet Emperor Ferdinand I of Austria, born in 1793. Ferdinand wasn't what you'd call a traditional leader. He suffered from multiple health issues, including epilepsy, and struggled with basic discipline. Still, thanks to royal blood and political convenience, he became emperor in 1835. And then, not much happened. Ferdinand wasn't exactly a firebrand. He rarely gave speeches. He didn't write stirring letters or command armies. In fact, he often needed help signing his own name. Buyers' advisors essentially ran the empire for him, while Ferdinand preferred the company of books, food, and long naps. He once famously said, "I am the emperor, and I want dumplings." A sentence so simple, yet so sincere, it became part of his legend. When revolution swept Europe in 1848, even that couldn't rouse him into action. Rather than cling to power or fight the change, he quietly abdicated, handing the throne to his nephew and stepping aside. He lived nearly 30 more years in peace. No scandals, no uprisings, just Ferdinand and probably more dumplings. His reign may not have shaped history, but it did slow it down. Sometimes that's all we need. A reminder that not every emperor has to conquer the world. Some are just here to take a nap, and let the rest of us do the same. Be Great Cheese War. You've heard of empires rising and falling, overland, gold, and power, but cheese. Yes, cheese. In the mid-14th century, a surprisingly tense feud began between two small alpine communities in what is now Switzerland. The disagreement: which village had the right to age and sell a particular kind of hard cheese. Both sides swore they had the original recipe, Both believed they'd perfected the process over generations, and both wanted to claim the cheese as their own. What followed wasn't exactly a war, not in the traditional sense. There were no battles, no swords, no heroes charging across field. Instead, it was a war of paperwork, pride, and curds. Arguments were made before councils. Local leaders issued contradictory rules. Even church officials got involved, trying to mediate this dairy-fueled standoff. 4 years, the tension simmered, not unlike the milk used to make the cheese itself. In the end, the dispute slowly dissolved, as quietly as it had begun. No one really won. The cheese continued to be made. People went back to work, and the world kept turning. Today, historians refer to it with an affectionate smile. The Cheese War. A reminder that not every conflict needs to be loud or violent. Some are fought with stubbornness and maybe just a sprinkle of salt. So, the next time you enjoy a slice of aged cheese, think of the villagers who nearly went to war over it. Not with weapons, but with pride, patience, and a strong belief in their dairy tradition. The invention of soap and how people avoided it. For centuries, soap simple, clean, and always within reach today. But for most of human history, it was more of a curiosity than a habit. The earliest evidence of soap-like substances goes all the way back to ancient Babylon, around 2800 BC. Clay tablets from the time mention mixing animal fat with ash, creating a rough, greasy cleanser that worked, sort of. The ancient Egyptians also dabbled with soap, often adding fragrant oils to make it more pleasant. Romans took it a step further. They used a substance called soap, which combined tallow and wood ash, though some historians believe it was used more for washing clothes than skin. When it came to personal hygiene, Romans often preferred a visit to the public bath, where they'd decoat themselves in oil and scrape it off with a metal tool called a strigil, soap optional. Fast forward a few centuries, and you'd think things would have gotten cleaner. But during the early medieval period in Europe, soap almost disappeared entirely. In fact, by the time the 14th century rolled around, bathing itself had become somewhat controversial. Some believed that water could open the pores, allowing sickness to sneak into the body. Others thought regular washing was a sign of vanity, or worse, moral weakness. People did what they could. They changed their undergarments. They wore perfumes. They powdered their wigs by actual soap and water. That was for laundry, not limbs. It wasn't until the 17th and 18th centuries that attitudes began to shift again. Soap making became more refined. The French developed milder formulas. English began to tax soap, a strange way of encouraging cleanliness. But progress nonetheless. By the 19th century, thanks to the Industrial Revolution and a few public health campaigns, soap finally became normal after nearly 4,000 years. The world had finally warmed up to the idea of a good scrub. So next time you're half asleep in the shower, barely awake, with a bar of soap in hand. Just remember, for most of history, that would have been considered wildly unnecessary. The town that tried to ban clocks. These days, time is everywhere. On your phone, your wrist, your microwave, even your shampoo bottle. But not so long ago, there was a town where people didn't just ignore clocks. They wanted them gone. Our story takes us to Murren, a tiny mountain village in Switzerland, in the early 1800s, nestled in the Alps and reachable only by winding paths. Murren was quiet, slow, and perfectly content that way. Life moved at the pace of the sun and the rhythm of the cows, not numbers ticking away on a tower. But then change came knocking. A group of local officials, inspired by nearby cities, proposed installing a clock tower in the village square. It would be helpful, they argued. People could coordinate work better. Bells could chime on the hour. Life could run more efficiently. The villagers, however, weren't sold. Many believed the very idea of public timekeeping would ruin their way of life. They feared the clock would turn peaceful days into rushed ones. Neighbors would start watching each other more closely. Deadlines would sneak into places where none existed before. Some elders even claimed the ticking sound would disrupt the mountain air. A strange, poetic concern that somehow made perfect sense to everyone involved. In the end, the clock tower proposal was politely but firmly rejected. Murren would remain clock-free for decades longer. And even when watchers and train timetables eventually reached the region, the attitude stuck. Time was something to feel, not measure. Today, Murren is known as a peaceful getaway, ironically famous for how slowly time seems to pass. And maybe that's not such a bad thing, because while the rest of the world was rushing, Murren quietly reminded us, not everything needs to be scheduled. The long history of sitting down at the end of a long day, there's nothing quite like sinking into a chair. But have you ever wondered how we ended up sitting the way we do? Because once upon a time, chairs were not for sitting. At least, not for most people. In ancient Egypt, chairs were symbols of power. Pharaohs sat on ornate thrones, elevated above others, often made of gold and inlaid with jewels. Common folk, meanwhile, sat on the floor, on cushions, or maybe a low stool, if they were lucky. Sitting on something tall and sturdy, that was a royal privilege. The Greeks and Romans followed suit. Their chairs were beautifully carved, hibacked, and often reserved for philosophers, priests, or judges. To sit in a chair was to make a statement. I matter. I'm important. I don't sit on the ground. In medieval Europe, that message got even louder. Kings and bishops had thrones, heavy, towering seats with elaborate detail. Everyone else made do with benches or barrels. Even in noble houses, the head of the table might have a chair, while everyone else shared a plank. Chairs were status, betwissen tea. Until the 16th and 17th centuries, the chairs began to spread. Slowly, into homes of the upper middle class. At first, just a few, one in the bedroom, maybe two, for guests. And then, with time and trade and the Industrial Revolution, pictures became common. Suddenly, we had dining chairs, writing chairs, reading chairs, rocking chairs, recliners, folding chairs, lawn chairs, bean bags. From power to comfort, from exclusivity to mass production. Today, chairs are so ordinary, they're practically invisible. And yet, each one is a quiet monument to a history of royalty, architecture, and the simple human desire to rest. So, next time you sit down and sigh, take a moment to appreciate the centuries it took for that seat to arrive beneath you. Even the act of sitting has a long, slow backstory. The world's most pointless encyclopedia. Some people write books to change the world. Others just want to write everything down, no matter how ordinary, obscure, or completely useless it may seem. Enter Pierre Atanas Larousse, a French grammarian with a passion for knowledge and a truly monumental obsession with detail. In the mid-1800s, Larousse began work on a project he called the Grand Dictionnaire Universel du Zix, a massive encyclopedia that would attempt to capture, quite literally, everything he thought worth knowing. Not just emperors and wars, but cheese-making technique, obscure flowers, unremarkable rivers, and every variation of French punctuation. Beer, if it had a name or shape, Pierre wanted it listed. At first, publishers were baffled. The thing was enormous, tedious, beautifully typeset, but borderline unreadable. P included facts no one had asked for, and definitions that felt more like opinions. For example, under absinthe, he wrote that it was a deadly drink that rots the mind of poet. And under prepositions, he offered more than 2,000 words on how to properly arrange them, with footnotes. Still, Larousse pressed on, publish, volume after volume, filling pages with calm, careful observations about birds, herbs, stones, shoes, colors, dates, and dust. By the time the final volumes were released, the full encyclopedia stretched across 17 books. It was so large, libraries had to create special shelves just to hold it. Some readers admired it, others fell asleep reading it. Many did both, but Pierre didn't care. He hadn't written it for speed or fame. He wrote it because, in his quiet way, he believed every fact, no matter how small, deserved a home. Even the dullest details, he thought, could be beautiful, if you looked closely enough. And in the end, isn't that what history is made of? Not just wars and dates, but tiny facts and forgotten things. Acquire goodbye from history. So, here we are, at the end of our stroll through the slow lanes of history. We didn't rush. We didn't race. We wandered. We visited the molasses flood that oozed through Boston Street. We counted sheep, shaved beards, skipped 11 days on the calendar, and imagined emperors napping through revolutions. We watched chairs evolve, clocks get rejected, and encyclopedias ballooned with information no one really needed. And maybe, in a strange way, that's the beauty of it. Because history isn't always thunder and fireworks. Sometimes it's soft, unnoticed, forgotten. It's the quiet act of sitting down. Bet the decision not to fight, the accidental inventions, the peaceful protests that never make the textbook. It's everything that didn't change the world, and somehow still mattered. So if your eyes are heavy now, that's okay. You don't need to remember every date or name. You don't need to take notes or stay alert. Be. You've spent a little time in the gentle corners of the past, and now it's time to let it go. Close your eyes. Let the molasses settle. Let the sheep jump softly. Let the clocks stay quiet. History will still be here when you wake up. Good night. Welcome, dear listener, to another gentle drift through the quiet corridors of time. Tonight, we'll be exploring a chapter long tucked away in the folds of history nearly forgotten, yet still faintly echoing across the century. Whether you're curled up with a warm drink or already nestled beneath the cupboard, thank you for allowing my voice to accompany you tonight. Before we begin, I'd love to know where in the world are you listening from, and what hour finds you now. Is the sun just peeking over your horizon, or are you, like me, surrounded by the hush of night? If the quiet telling of old stories helps your mind find stillness, I'd be ever so grateful if you'd subscribe. There are many more journeys ahead, waiting just beyond the veil of sleep. In a time when kings ruled by divine right and peasants bent beneath the weight of feudal life, there existed one of the most perilous professions imaginable: mining. For many, it was the only alternative to coaxing meager life. From stubborn, stony fields, a harsh trade-off of peril for pay. The irony was sharp. In climbing toward a better fate, these souls descended both literally and spiritually to the depths of the earth, into darkness. The medieval world was no stranger to hardship, but among its countless burdens, the lives of miners stood apart, uniquely cruel, uniquely bleak. They exchanged sunlight for shadow, fresh air for the bitter sting of underground dust, bee and the joy of sky or wind for cold stone walls that could at any moment become a grave. Let us follow one such soul, a man named Edmund. Edmund has known more dust than soil, more torchlight than sunlight. Biz he raises before dawn in his small timber-framed cottage near the edge of a mining village in Derbyshire. The year is 1347. Above ground, kingdoms are at war. A terrible plague stirs beyond the borders, and politics shift like the wind. But Edmund's world is smaller and much heavier. His worries are not of thrones, but of rope and rock and the breath in his lungs. He breaks his fast with a heel, of course, dark bread, and a mouthful of small Birin changed 4 years. His wife, Margaret, hands him a cloth-wrapped bundle for his midday meal. More bread, maybe a sliver of cheese, if they've been lucky. and always a small flask of ale. Her, his only comfort in the darkness to come. She says nothing of her fear. What words would help when every farewell might be the last, and each return in the evening feels like a small miracle? But the walk to the mine is quiet. Edmund passes the simple thatched homes of his fellow laborers, then the village chapel, where the priest already awake offers morning prayers for their safety. The prayers rise gently into the cold air, seeming to fade before reaching heaven. Other miners join him in the slow procession, faces drawn, shoulders heavy. A few already cough with that deep, rattling sound, a signature of lungs, given way to years of dust and poor air. And then the mine appears looming like the mouth of some ancient, waiting creature. Wooden beams frame the entrance, though they offer little reassurance. In this age, safety is a hope, not a guarantee. The rope that will lower Edmund into the shaft is made of coarse hemp. There is no science to check its strength, no standard, just touch and experience. One fray too many, and a man falls forever. Before stepping forward, Edmund pauses. He removes his cap, crosses himself, and down, and murmurs a prayer to St. Barbara, patron saint of miners. According to legend, she was imprisoned in a tower her life, walled in by stone. She is the chosen protector of those who toil beneath the earth, entombed by rock and silence. In a world where faith and superstition entwine like vines on stone, such small rituals are all a miner can carry with him. The descent begins. Ropes grown through wooden pulleys sound so familiar it might as well be breath. Down they go, Edmund and his companions leaving behind bird song, fresh wind, and the flickering sun. The deeper they descend, the colder it becomes. The air grows thick, unmoving. The shaft walls, hucked from ancient rock press, close, wet with underground moisture. Down, deeper still, until the world above becomes only a memory. But at the bottom, the true work begins. In the dim glow of oil lamps and tallow candles, Edmund faces 12 hours of grueling labor. His tools are simple: a small, sharp pickaxe, a hammer, chisels, nearly unchanged from Roman times. Progress is slow, measured in inches, not feet. A steady scraping, a determined chipping away at coal or silver seems hidden in the rock. The work is crushing. The tunnels are narrow, some so tight a man must lie sideways to reach the coal face. Miners spend hours on end, bent double or twisted at awkward angles. Years of this has left Edmund's spine permanently curved. His joints groaned. You can tell the seasoned men by their gait, alone cautious, uneven, carved by pain. Younger miners stand straight, walk freely. Older ones walk like shadows of their former selves. But it isn't just the physical toll. There is a hum, a pressure, a constant tension beneath the surface. The fear never leaves. The fear that the earth might shift, collapse, bury them alive. Strange noises ripple through the tunnels, the creak of old wooden beams, the drip of unseen water, the groan of distant rock settling in unseen cracks to surface world. These sounds would be odd down here. They are warnings, or omens. Every breath Edmund takes could be his last, and yet this is his life. One day after another, stone after stone, strike after strike. Tomorrow will be the same, and the next, and the one after that. But for tonight, dear listener, we leave Edmund in the flickering dark. His world may be silent, but he is not forgotten. His story, like so many, lives on in the stillness we now share. So rest easy. Let the past cradle you like an old lullaby. Bear, and know that wherever you are, you're not alone in the quiet. Beneath the surface, the rhythm of the deep, the hours underground pass, not in minutes, but in moments, measured by breath and blows. Each strike of Edmund's pick against the rock echoes in the tunnel like a slow, steady heartbeat. There is no clock here, no sky to chart the sun's path. Time becomes a rhythm of effort and exhaustion. B works in a small chamber off the main shaft, just large enough for 3 men to labor side by side. Bare faces, lit only by flickering candlelight, are streaked with sweat and soot, their eyes rimmed with the telltale red of dust exposure. They do not speak much. In these depths, words feel heavier than stone. When they do speak, it is in murmurs, half sentences, old jokes, whispered prayers. Sometimes they hum, a low, tuneless sound that blends with the creak of timbers and the soft scraping of tools. There is comfort in the routine, in knowing each gesture, each pause, each breath. Even in this suffocating world, familiarity can feel like warmth. Around midday, or what passes for it, Edmund takes his meal. He sits on a flat stone and unwraps Margaret's bundle. The bread is stale. The cheese, if there is any, is soft and sharp. The ale, though lukewarm, soothes his throat. He eats slowly, deliberately. Meals are sacred in the mine, not just for nourishment, but for a few quiet moments of stillness. The men say little while they eat. Only the occasional cough breaks the silence. One man, Hugh, younger than the rest, pulls out a small carved token from his pocket, a smooth bit of wood shaped like a bird, a gift from his daughter. He holds it in his palm for a long time before tucking it away again. No words are needed. They all understand. The earth shifts later that afternoon as the men dig deeper into the seam. A sound stops them. Not loud, not sharp, strong, blow, groan, like wood, twisting under pressure. Then a faint, unmistakable rumbler, warning sigh of a wall beginning to fail. Edmund freezes. He knows that sound. They all do, without a word. The men drop their tools. They listen. Every breath held, every muscle tight. Then it comes a sharp crack, a shower of dust, a scream from deeper down the tunnel. The earth has moved. The collapse is partial somewhere near the south shaft. Not where they are, but close enough. A run sent one of the boys, thin and fast, who scrambles back toward the surface to raise the alarm. The rest of the men remain. They know there may be survivors, or there may not. Still they go. Navigating the tunnels in the aftermath of a collapse is like walking through a graveyard that hasn't decided who it belongs to. The air is thicker now, full of stone dust, harder to breathe. Lamps flicker, shadows stretch. Every footstep is a risk. We reached a blocked shaft. The wooden supports are splintered, the passage half filled with rubble, and beneath it, a voice, faint, desperate. Someone is alive. The men move into action, wordlessly, efficiently. They pass stones back hand to hand, clear debris as fast as their tired muscles allow. There is no panic, only urgency. Eventually, they find him. It's Thomas Bailey, 20, caught beneath a collapsed beam. His leg is twisted, bloodied, but he's breathing. They pull him free, binding the wound with scraps of cloth, and lifting him onto a crude stretcher made of tools and rope. Bedmond walks beside him as they begin the long climb back to the surface, return to the world above the ascent from the mine. Always feels longer than the descent, especially today. Each man returns, blinking into the late afternoon light, as if waking from a dream. Their bodies are smeared with coal dust, their hands raw and bruised, but they are above ground. They are breathing open air. Bedman looks up. The sky is pale, cloud-streaked, and unbelievably white. It always takes him a moment to remember how blue it can be. Margaret is there waiting by the path, her hands clenched in her apron. She does not rush to him, nor cry out. She simply looks her eyes, searching for injury, for pain, for signs. He's not the same man who went below that morning. He nods to her. A silence. I'm still here. She nods back. Welcome, dear listener, to another quiet wander through the pages of history. Tonight, we'll be exploring a forgotten chapter of ancient life, one that still echoes softly through time. Whether you're resettling in with a warm drink or already wrapped in blankets, thank you for letting my voice keep you company tonight. Before we begin, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time of day. Is it for you? Are you hearing this as the sun rises? Or are you like me, surrounded by the hush of nighttime? If the idea of gentle stories from long ago helps ease your mind, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe. There are many more journeys waiting for us just beyond the veil of sleep. In this era, when kings ruled by a divine right and peasants lived at the mercy of their lords, mining was perhaps the most perilous occupation one could undertake. Yet for many it represented the only path to something approaching prosperity, a chance to earn coin rather than scraping bare sustenance from unyielding soil. Irony was cruel and complete. In seeking to rise from poverty, these miners descended, literally and figuratively, into conditions that would challenge Every fiber of their being, the medieval world, was a tapestry woven from hardship. But even among the many threads of suffering, the lives of miners stood out in their particular darkness. These were men who traded sunlight for shadow, fresh air for suffocating depths, and the simple pleasure of seeing the sky for the constant companionship of stone walls that could become their tomb. Without warning, let us follow one such soul. Into the depths, a man named, whose weathered hands had known more coal dust than soil, whose eyes have grown accustomed to torchlight rather, bead in the sun's warm glow. Edmund rises before dawn in his small cottage on the outskirts of a mining village. In the years 1347, and the world above ground wrestles with war, plague, and political upheaval. By Edmund's concerns are more immediate and more visceral. He breaks his fast on a heel of dark bread and small beer, the same meal he has eaten for countless mornings. Is a bit more bread, perhaps, if they have been fortunate, and always the small flask of ale that will be his only comfort in the... She does not speak of her fears. For what good would it do? Every kiss goodbye might be their last every evening reunion. A small miracle, the walk to the mine, takes Edmund through the village, past the homes of his fellow miners, past the small church where the priest offers prayers for their safety. Bats that seem to echo unheard in the morning, ere other men join him on this silent procession, their faces bearing the particular power of those who spend their days away from sunlight. Some cough already, the deep rattling sound that speaks of lungs, slowly surrendering to years of breathing stone. Dust and stale air. The mine entrance looms before them like the mouth of some ancient beast. Wooden supports frame the opening, but these timbers offer little reassurance. In an age when engineering was more art than science, when safety was a luxury few could afford, passports represented hope more than security. The rope that will lower Edmund into the darkness is rough, hemp inspected by touch, rather than any systematic method. One frayed strand, one weak point could send a man plummeting to his death. But perhaps the most thrilling detail of Edmund's morning routine is what he does before entering that dark mouth. He removes his cap and crosses himself, murmuring a prayer to St. Barbara, the patron saint of miners. In a world where faith and superstition intertwined like the roots of ancient trees, these small rituals provided what St. Barbara, who, according to legend, was imprisoned in a tower by her father, seemed a fitting protector for men who would spend their days imprisoned by stone. Men. Down they go, leaving behind the world of weather and seasons, of bird song and wind through trees. The temperature drops noticeably as the walls of the shaft carved from at the bottom. Edmund S. Real work begins in the flickering light of oil lamps and tallow candles. He will spend the next 12 hours attacking the earth with tools that seem pitifully inadequate for the task his pickaxe, while sharp, is small. Be hammers and chisels at his disposal would be recognizable to a Roman miner from 1,000 years past. Progress is measured not in tons extracted, but in inches gained in the slow, methodical chipping away at seams of coal or veins of precious metal. The work is back-breaking in the most literal sense. Miners often worked in spaces so cramped they could not stand upright, spending hour after hour bent double or lying on their sides to reach the coal face. Edmund's spine has developed a permanent curve from years of this posture, and his joints protest with every movement. The young men who enter the mine stand straight and move with easy grace. Those bodies have been reshaped by their labor. But the physical demands of the work pale beside the constant, gnawing fear that accompanies every moment. Underground, the earth itself seems alive with malevolent intent. Strange sounds echo through the tunnels, the settling of rock, the drip of underground water, the creaking of wooden supports strained beyond their limits. Every sound might herald disaster. Every vibration could signal the beginning of a cabin that would bury a man alive. The air Edmund breathes is a cocktail of dangers invisible to the naked eye. Cold dust floats constantly in the stagnant atmosphere, settling in his lungs with each breath. Over time, this dust will accumulate, turning his lungs black and hard, making each breath a struggle. The condition has no name in Edmund's time, but we know it as pneumoniosis, the black lung disease that claimed the lives of countless miners. It is a slow death, a gradual suffocation that can take decades to complete its work. Water is another constant threat in these underground workings. Spring rains and winter snows find their way through cracks in the earth, pooling in the lowest levels of the mine. Edmund often works standing in water up to his ankles, sometimes deeper. Proper drainage requires engineering expertise and resources that few medieval mines possessed the light in. Edmund's workspace is illuminated by candles made from animal fat, their flames dancing with every current of air and casting wild shadows on the tunnel walls. These flames provide barely enough light to see the immediate work area, leaving the tunnels beyond shrouded in a darkness so complete it seems to have weight and substance. Oil lamps, while slightly more reliable than candles, are expensive and produce their own hazards. The open flames that provide the only light are themselves a danger in an environment where pockets of explosive gas can accumulate without warning. Methane, the product of decomposing organic matter, seeps from coal seams and collects in low-lying areas of the mine. A single spark, a candle flame that burns too close to a gas pocket, can trigger an explosion that will kill every man in the tunnel and perhaps bring down the entire working. Edmund has seen such disasters. He has helped carry out the broken bodies of men who were laughing and joking just hours before. He has comforted widows and fatherless children, knowing that tomorrow it might be Margaret weeping over his own still form. These experiences leave their mark, not just on the survivors, but on the entire mining community. Everyone knows someone who has died underground. Everyone has heard the stories of cabins that buried men alive, explosions that left nothing but charred remains. The tools of Edmund's trade tell their own story of hardship and limitation. His pickaxe, while essential, is a simple thing of iron and wood. The metal is soft by modern standards, requiring constant sharpening and frequent replacement. The wooden handle worn smooth by countless hands must be replaced regularly, as the jarring impact of striking stone splits and weakens the wood. Shovels for moving loose coal and rock are crude affairs. Their blades, fashioned by local blacksmiths, who work more from tradition than from any scientific understanding of metal. Wheelbarrows used to transport materia. Through the tunnels are small and flimsy, their wooden wheels apt to break under heavy loads or in the rough conditions of the mine floor. Perhaps most telling of all are the baskets and leather bags used to carry coal and ore to the surface. These containers, woven from whatever materials are available, speak to the hand-to-mouth existence of the mining operation. There are no standardized containers, no systematic approach to moving material. Each miner makes do with whatever he can fashion or afford. The absence of proper ventilation in medieval mines created an environment was not merely uncomfortable but actively hostile. The air Edmund breathes has been breathed by dozens of men before him. It carries not just coal dust, but the exhalations of his fellow workers, the smoke from their candles and lamps and gases, seeping from the earth itself in summer. The stagnant air becomes thick and oppressive, causing men to faint from. In winter, the contrast between the cold surface air and the relatively warm depths creates its own problems. As moisture condenses on the tunnel walls and drips constantly onto the workers below, Edmund's clothes are perpetually, and the chill seeps into his bones during the long climb. Back to the surface each evening, the lack of fresh becomes a danger to every other worker, but few can afford to stay home when sick the daily wage, as it represents the difference between eating and going hungry for many mining families. Edmund's workday follows a rhythm as old as mining itself. He begins by examining his section of the tunnel, looking for signs that the earth is shifted during the night. Loose rocks must be cleared away, water must be bailed out of low spots, and the condition of the wooden supports must be assessed this morning. Inspection is yesterday might be treacherous today. The actual work of extracting coal or ore is methodical and exhausting. Edmund positions himself at the coal face, the exposed seam, where he will spend most of his day. He begins by undercutting the coal using his pickaxe to create a horizontal cut at the base of the seam. This technique, while effective, is incredibly dangerous.